Chair, you can go ahead and get started whenever you'd like.
Okay, why don't we get started, given we have a packed agenda. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kate Stewart, the COG Board Chair, and I'd like to call our May meeting of the COG Board of Directors to order. Thank you all for joining us virtually for today's meeting. As we always do, we will start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you will stand and recite the pledge with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Looking ahead, as we're during our meeting today, please remember to keep your microphones muted unless you're speaking. If you'd like to speak, please make sure to unmute your line and then return to mute. You can also use the chat box, and you can use the raise the hand function that should be at the bottom of your screen. As a reminder, our webinars, audio and video, are being live streamed on the COG website through the COG's YouTube account. And first, I think Monica will complete a roll call to document your presence at the meeting. And Monica, you can go ahead.
Okay, for the District of Columbia, I have Charles Allen. Is there anyone else from the District of Columbia? Okay, for Maryland, I have Reuben Collins, Michael O'Connor, Jessica Fitzwater, Joy Schaefer, Denise Mitchell, Emmett Jordan, Kate Stewart, Tom Dernoga, and Bridget Newton, and Craig Moe and Richard Monalino. Anybody else from Maryland that I missed? Okay, for Virginia, Christian Dorsey, Catherine Reed, Penny Gross, Rodney Lusk, David Snyder, Ann Wheeler, and Andrea Bailey. Anyone else from Virginia?
Wilson's here.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Monica. All right, some important dates.
Sorry, Chair. Julie Briskman here from Virginia as well. Couldn't find my unmute button. Sorry.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much, Julie. Terrific. All right. Please make sure to save the date for the COG Leadership Retreat. It's scheduled July 14th to the 15th in Cambridge, Maryland. And if you have not registered yet, please reach out to the COG staff as soon as possible. Moving right into agenda item 3, I'd like to turn it over now to our Executive Director, Clark Mercer, to give his report.
Thank you, Chair. And I was doing the math 4 months into the new gig, so enjoying it, and had an opportunity to meet with many of you. And I've sat down with most of our 120 some odd staff one-on-one, so getting some good feedback. You have in your board packet a nice summary that our comms team puts together on press that we've gotten the last month and different policy meetings. So please review that. I'm not going to review each of those items. I would highlight 2 recent events that our chair participated in and additional board members. One was the corrections wreath laying ceremony. That was last weekend, and that's the 31st year that COG has led that event with the Corrections Chiefs Committee to honor the important role of our corrections officers and honor those who have died in the line of duty. So COG Chair Stewart was there and provided remarks, and Beza Nadeau as our staff lead. So a big thank you to Beza and the chair. Street Smart Kickoff was on April 13th, and that included a number of folks, our chair, Council President Evan Glass, and County Executive Mark Elrick in Montgomery County to kick off this twice-a-year campaign. It coincides with daylight savings times. That's when we see the most crashes, increase in crashes, and it calls attention to the stories and the people behind the crash numbers, combined with a public campaign, outreach campaign to increase awareness and to enact change. The chair kind of has previewed a little bit coming up. I wanted to, for this meeting and the next, we'll be getting updates from the Biden administration on some funding opportunities for the region, including your jurisdictions. Today will be the Department of Energy and Chris Castro. Next month, the meeting will be transportation focused. It will be a heavy dose of updates from Union Station. To be determined, we may actually meet at the station, but we'll get an update from the Department of Transportation and the portfolio of projects that are available. Budget will be up for discussion and vote today. A big thank you to our CFO, Julie Mussog, and our budget and finance team, our treasurer, Mayor O'Connor, and we've got the homelessness count and the round 10 projections. The retreat was mentioned. That's the 14th and 15th in Cambridge. Rather than taking on a number of different issues, we're going to do a deep dive on 2 topics at the retreat. One will be Metro, and Randy Clark will be in attendance, and we'll have representation from, DC, Virginia, Maryland to discuss the current state of play and challenges ahead with WMATA moving forward. I think it's an important conversation I know folks have been having. This gives us an opportunity to have it and a little more frank and candid atmosphere at the retreat. And then on Saturday, economic development, and we'll be looking at workforce development. We'll be looking at a deep dive on what the projections mean for your jurisdictions and how we can effectuate that moving forward. A couple other events coming up this month. This is Bike Month, National Bike Month. COG and Commuter Connections runs that. So on Friday, May 19th is Bike to Work Day. It's also the opening of the Potomac Yard Metro Station. So you can bike there and then bike to work if that suits you. On the 18th, we're going to do a little preview at COG to get some more attention for Bike to Work Day. We're doing a bike outing here to the Met Branch Trail. As a staff, I've got my helmet here in the office. I remember to bring it in. Staff are renting Capital Bike Share if they don't own a bike or don't feel comfortable biking downtown. That gives them a more manageable trip to take during the day. And then on Friday, I'll be joining some of our members and several of our staff for an ag tour of farms in Loudoun County. So thank you to our Loudoun County members and to Lindsay Smith for pulling that together. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Mercer. It has been a very busy, April was a very busy month. Lots of going on. So next we'll turn to our agenda. Are there any amendments to today's agenda? You can put something in the chat or raise your hand. I'm not seeing anything, so we will move on from there. We do have a great deal in our agenda today, so I'm going to be moving us along. And the first item we actually have for action is approval of minutes from our April 12th, 2023 meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from that meeting?
Penny Gross moves approval.
All right.
Second,
Supervisor
Andrea
Gross.
Bailey.
Was that Supervisor Bailey? Second?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, great. So we have a motion and a second. Any abstention? Since we're on video, the usual way we do it is just to ask for any abstentions or any nay votes. Again, you can type that in the chat or raise your hand, and I'm not seeing any, so the motion passes. Thank you for the adoption of the minutes. Our next action item is on the consent agenda. This is item number 6. We have one resolution today on the consent agenda regarding approval of a regional communications resiliency study, which can be found on page 17 of your board packet. Is there a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda?
So
moves
moved.
approval.
I think I hear Mr. Snyder first and then Chair Randall as the second. Is that correct?
Or the other way around,
Or
Madam
the other way
Chair.
around, one or the other. Whoever's taking the notes can decide. Thank you for that. Are there any abstentions or nay votes? Okay, seeing none, the motion passes. Terrific. Now we will move to our item agenda number 7, which is the 2023 Foster Parent Appreciation. And I have to say, this is probably one of my favorite things that we get to do at COG during the month of May. Foster parents are essential to ensuring the youth in our region are safe and their needs are provided for. These parents' willingness to open their hearts and their homes to these children and to help them learn their skills, reunite with their birth families, transition to independence, and many other responsibility is beyond commendable. And I am honored today to help recognize the 2023 Foster Parents of the Year in our region for their dedication and kindness throughout their service. You can read about the Foster Parents of the Year from each jurisdiction in your board packet. And now we will actually show a video highlighting this year's outstanding foster parents.
You have nothing to lose and everything to gain by being a foster parent.
Every day you have the opportunity to spend time with kids and show them what love is.
One of my biggest regrets about fostering is that I didn't do it sooner because I didn't think I was ready. I realized that I really did have everything I needed, so I just took the classes and went ahead and got licensed.
We had a lot of love to give, and we thought the best way would be to foster.
My heart has expanded 10 times. I didn't know how naturally parenthood could come to a person, and I'm just so grateful. This was truly a blessing to us.
It's amazing to have kids in the house. It's not without challenges, but it's also rewarding. You know that you can help shape them and you're able to love them, and that's what these kids need. They need stability, they need consistency, and if anything else, just love.
Seeing the impact that you make on these kids' lives is absolutely amazing.
How much you can give to these families, to these children, and what it teaches your own family and your own kids is just incredibly rewarding.
My desire is to experience life. It's being there to support them as they grow.
One thing they taught us is it's okay to open your heart. You can be everything to that child to show them that they are worthy.
We've grown as a family, and it has stretched our worldview in a very positive way. We're able to provide a loving home to whoever needs us, and
for as long as they need
us.
Each child that comes in your home, they're different, so you got to do things a different way.
They don't know how to say, I love you or I care, but they show it in different ways. Those are the fun moments, the moments of, yeah, they're getting it.
Our kids have adjusted nicely to having other children in our home. I think they benefited greatly in knowing that everyone does not come from a home such as ours.
At the end of the night, when I look at them sleeping in bed, they're safe, they're happy, and I just couldn't imagine it any other way. There are so many kids out there in need of a safe, loving home. If you have the space and the availability, just do it.
Wonderful. Thank you to the COG staff for putting that together, and thank you and congratulations again to our 2023 Foster Parents of the Year. After the meeting, the staff will share the links to the video we just viewed, and in addition to the video, in addition to the videos on each of the family, you can promote this with your respective jurisdictions, and so that will go out after our meeting today. And again, more information on the families can be found in your board packet. So thank you again. All right, moving on to item number 8. This is our fiscal year 2023 third quarter financial report. And we will hear from COG Board Secretary Treasurer, Mayor O'Connor, and our COG Chief Financial Officer, Julie Mussog, who will brief the board on the third quarter financial statements. First, I'll turn it over to Mayor O'Connor.
Thank you, Chair Stewart. The fiscal year Q3 financial report is in the board packet starting on page 19, showing the results of the quarter that ended on March 31st of 2023. This is, as a reminder, an interim and unaudited report prepared by management. I have reviewed the information with Ms. Mussog, COG's Chief Financial Officer, and am now going to turn it over to her to provide additional details and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Operating revenue and expenses are tracking lower to the FY23 budget at 65% and 59% respectively, but this is right about at mid-year totals for the prior year. Revenues are generally higher in the second half of the fiscal year, so this is in large part a timing issue, and we do expect to track closer to the FY23 budget by year end. Lower federal and state revenue year to date to the budget is driven by lower spend in transportation planning board work program and commuter connections. These are cost reimbursable projects, so the year to date expenses are also lower than budget, right around 50%. As of the end of Q3, we have a surplus of $1.4 million in designated program fund balance. The Housing Affordability Planning Program is just a $500,000 grant from Amazon, and several water and air programs are driving the increase in restricted project funds. The increase in undesignated funds are a result of higher revenues than budgeted for the Cooperative Purchasing Program and the REIT dividend for the building. The Cooperative Purchasing Program has already generated about $345,000 in revenue so far this year. For the third year in a row, will not need any subsidy from COG from general funds. It will also, in fact, be able to generate some significant funds to COG after expenses. Subrecipient pass-through funds are at about 68% of the amount budgeted and are on track to hit budget for the year. An additional $1 million for the Amtrak engine repower project was received in this third quarter, bringing the total to the budgeted amount of $2.6 million. The statement of net position as of March 31, 2023 shows an overall increase in net position of $3.1 million, and this increase reflects the impact of the increase year over year in the restricted and unrestricted project fund balances. Overall, COG remains financially healthy, and the board designated reserves are still 100% funded, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have at this point. All right,
Great.
seeing your questions, I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Mussog. Just checking to make sure there are any, one more time, any questions. Folks can put it in the chat or raise your hands. And I'm not seeing any. Thank you, Mayor O'Connor and Ms. Mussog, again, for a terrific report. And if folks want to dig in deeper, again, it's in your board packet. All right, next we'll go to our optimizing federal funding opportunities available to local governments in the energy sector. I do see that Mr. Castro has joined us. Mr. Castro is with the U.S. Department of Energy, Office of State and Community Energy Programs. And he's going to review, as we discussed, the current energy-related federal funding opportunities available for local governments. And I know everyone is really anxious to hear from you, Mr. Castro. So I'm just going to turn it over to you to do a short presentation, and then we'll open it up for conversation.
Wonderful, thank you. And let me just get my screen shared for you all. Hopefully you're able to see that as we get up and running. And thank you, Kate and Clark and the Washington COG staff and members for this invitation. It's a real pleasure to be with you this afternoon and shed light and hopefully demystify some of the current community energy programs coming out of the Department of Energy. Very quickly, as a brief background, I'm about 9 months into this role, serving as the Chief of Staff to the U.S. Department of Energy's newly formed Office of State and Community Energy Programs, also known as SCEP. But I'm coming from the last 10 years working on the ground in the city of Orlando, Florida, where I served there as the mayor's senior advisor, Mayor Dyer's advisor, and the director of the Office of Sustainability and Resilience. And in that role, I worked very closely with our regional planning council, known as the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, on a number of different programs, including creation of what's called the Regional Resilience Collaborative, or the R2C. It's made up of 7 counties, 78 cities, all working together to try to advance sustainability and resilience and climate action strategies. And in fact, we looked at the Washington COG and your leadership in providing everything from regional greenhouse gas inventories for your supporting members and really working together towards climate strategies. So very much appreciate your work. and see its incredible value in working together as local governments to address not just regional challenges, but really prepare us for the opportunities ahead. And that is a nice segue actually into this work at the Department of Energy, where we're really in this new office focused on advancing place-based clean energy transitions. Very quickly, I want to talk about the magic moment that we're currently in, the imperative around energy and climate justice as we look to advance and deploy these resources, a little overview of SCEP and our programs, and certainly what we're doing around community engagement. And I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to be running through this pretty quickly here. But first and foremost, I think it's important to set the stage around the priority that the Biden-Harris administration has put on climate and clean energy. This is one of their 4 key strategies for the administration, and really see it as an opportunity to boost domestic manufacturing and onshore our critical supply chains and critical minerals so that we can take control of this clean energy economy and its future. We also see it as a way of really boosting millions of high-paying, family-supporting jobs in this country, because clean energy is one of the fastest growing industries that we have in our economy. In many states, it is the fastest growing, and we see it as a real job creator. And lastly, we know that we can't transition to a net zero economy and a sustainable future without addressing environmental justice and the inequalities that have been facing our communities of color for far too long. So DOE, our role is really focused on the energy sector, of course, and we have these 3 North Stars that Secretary Granholm has us moving towards, and that includes we need to reduce our emissions 52% by the year 2030 compared to 2010 levels. We need to move towards 100% clean electricity grid by 2035 that's coming from carbon-free sources, and lastly, continue our path towards that net zero economy-wide by 2050. And so these are the science-based targets that we've been working towards. And of course, for decades, many of you and advocates on the ground and local governments have been pushing for action in this space around clean energy and climate action. And over the last year and a half, Congress and President Biden have delivered a very historic way, $500 billion across the federal government that is aimed at trying to really use this industrial strategy to advance and pivot our economy in a cleaner and healthier way. And these 3 laws here are really that perfect storm. What I've been calling the magic moment, of course, coming from Orlando, so I got to bring some of that magic with me up here to DC. But we are in a really incredible time, right? We have the bipartisan infrastructure law, which Secretary Granholm often talks about the backbone of the clean energy economy, because it's building clean tech infrastructure and supporting our supply chains. It's investing in our workers, making sure that we're driving resilience. We then had the CHIPS and Science Act, what we call the brain of the clean energy economy. And that's really driving continuation of innovation and manufacturing and regional economic growth, and really supporting kind of the manufacturing of semiconductors and these chips, which are in pretty much every single clean energy project, from EV charging stations to solar panels to inverters, you name it, right? And then lastly is the Inflation Reduction Act, what we call the lungs of the clean energy economy, that's really breathing new life into this opportunity. And it's focused on lowering household energy bills. It's focused on enabling new tax credits and rebates for consumers and businesses to drive forward clean tech and move clean tech into the mainstream market, and do so by addressing environmental injustices as well. So DOE, out of the $500 billion, DOE received $100 billion. And this came with a new mission tag, and that is around equitable deployment, right? For the last 45 years, DOE has primarily been a research and development agency, one of the leading scientific agencies around the world. We have 17 national labs. We're doing everything from mitigating nuclear proliferation to advancing heat pumps and offshore wind and geothermal and hydrogen, right? So a ton of things. But this $100 billion is different, and it is very focused on deploying in an equitable way to drive clean energy infrastructure and pivot our economy. And so as you can see here, DOE's gone through a realignment to move certain core program offices together to focus on that deployment mission. And you can see here, there's a new Undersecretary for Infrastructure, S3. This is a brand new pillar at the Department of Energy. And under that, 8 program offices that have been created. Some have been created and some have been moved into it in order to drive this deployment mission. A couple of those offices, the new ones include the Grid Deployment Office you see there, GDO, and that's of course focused on expanding and modernizing our electric grid. We know we're adding more EVs and more electrified, appliances in our homes, and as a result, that's increasing the load on the grid. And we need to make sure that the grid is reliable and resilient and affordable, and of course, sustainable. So these are the core aspects that GDO is looking at. We also have the Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains Office, MESC. This is about that onshoring of our critical minerals and supply chains and boosting our domestic manufacturing, whether it's for batteries, whether it's for solar panels, whether it's recycling of some of this clean technology. MESC is really leading the charge on that. And then you have in blue there, SCEP, State and Community Energy Programs. And really our mission is to partner with states, local and tribal governments, and community organizations that ultimately use energy as a way to catalyze economic development, job creation, avoiding legacy pollution, driving justice, and ultimately advancing this equitable clean energy future. So SCEP does that by essentially managing and overseeing $16 billion worth of formula and competitive grants and technical assistance programs. And with the rest of the time that I have, I want to quickly try to run through those with intention. Now, all of the funds that we're managing here at DOE have this real focus on equity and justice. And that's not just in SCEP, but it truly is the mission at hand as we're looking to deploy these resources. You all probably are well aware about President Biden's historic executive order 14008 that focused on advancing climate action with the focus on equity and launched what's called Justice 40, ensuring that all of the benefits of these federal new laws and new federal funding really supports and flows to our historically disadvantaged communities that have been marginalized, that have been underserved and overburdened by pollution for far too long. So for us in SCEP, we see 40% as the floor. We're actually trying to strive for much more than that. And within our program designs and how we're creating these grants, we're ensuring that these applicants are needing to focus on our neediest communities. So here's a high-level overview, and it's kind of a complex org chart that you're seeing here, but it gives you an idea of the different pillars that fall under this new Office of SCEP. You all might have been well aware of the Weatherization Assistance Program, which is the longest-serving energy efficiency program for low income in the country. That program has now been moved under SCEP's management, as well as the State Energy Program, which is a formula grant that goes to all 50 states, 5 territories, and Washington, D.C. on an annual basis to drive forward all types of different clean energy projects, energy security initiatives, and the like. Between WAP and SEP, you can see that there's over $4 billion there of resources. And those, again, even on the weatherization side, those are flowing to our states and into our communities by partnering with community action agencies at each county level in this country and deploying those resources with a network of contractors. So WAP and SEP, these are two foundational programs that DOE has had for over 40 years and are now living within SCEP to manage. Some of the new exciting community energy programs really were made possible because of the IIJA, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And so you can see there that third pillar is $1.2 billion, and it includes everything from EECBG to schools and nonprofits and workforce money. I'm going to dive into that shortly. And then this fourth pillar around partnerships and technical assistance. And this is really where the Inflation Reduction Act rebates, the consumer rebates that are going to flow for appliances and whole home performance, that's where they live. So, Bill, when I came in here July of 2022, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law had been around and SCEP was in the process of being formed. It still wasn't an official office, but it had $6 billion, a significant amount of funding to deploy. And these are some of the new programs that were created because of Bill. You can see at the top, those top 3 are focused on workforce development and training. There's $60 million there just in Bill that are trying to support the next generation of energy auditors and trainers and the like. We also have new capital funds, right? This revolving loan fund program that will flow to all 50 states, territories, and Washington, D.C. And that's creating new low-cost capital pools so that local governments, so that nonprofits and small businesses can tap into a fund to finance energy efficiency and clean energy projects with very low-cost capital. And then you have, other things around plussing up the state energy program and weatherization. They got big plus ups. You have new programs around nonprofits and schools, and that's really what I'll shed light a little bit more on. But one of the big grants that I'm excited about is EECBG. I remember when I was in Orlando, this was a transformative grant for Orlando. And we actually created a revolving energy fund within our municipal operations and retrofitted 56 different properties, over $20 million of investment. But we actually are now seeing $2.5 million in savings per year, using the savings to pay the debt. And it all happened because of these new funds. So EECBG this round now is going to flow to 2,708 communities. And it's an opportunity for these states and tribal governments and city and county governments to actually to have flexible funding around clean energy. It can go towards hiring consultants to do a roadmap towards clean energy. It could help invest in actual equipment like charging stations and solar panels and the like. It can actually work on re-granting to your community as sub-grants or incentives for things like rooftop solar. There's 15 different eligible uses for EECBG. And I do want to mention that although 2,708 entities will be getting direct formula grants, there is also a carve out for the smaller city and county governments that are not eligible for that formula grant. There's actually 2 bites at the apple for those communities. One is that DOE, we just solicited a few weeks ago, a competitive funding announcement for EECBG that allows those smaller towns and cities and counties to apply to. And so that's open, and we have about $8.8 million that's available for those projects. In addition, every state that receives these dollars is required by law to sub-grant 60% of their EECBG formula dollars to the same smaller and city county governments that don't get a formula. So again, if you're not getting a formula allocation from EECBG, you have 2 bites at the apple, one through your state and one through the federal government to also participate in this great program. Some of the new, grants around nonprofits are really exciting. And in fact, just here in the next couple of weeks, we will be announcing the funding announcement for the $50 million pot for nonprofit 501c3s. This is specifically for nonprofits that own and operate their own buildings. That is part of the eligible criteria that Congress drafted. So you have to own and operate the building. You got to be a 501c3, but this money basically can help to drive energy efficiency retrofits in those buildings so that we can lower the cost of operation and put more money to the mission, whether it's a childcare facility, a homeless shelter, a food bank. I mean, so many of our nonprofits in our communities need these types of resources, and we're excited about the ability of being able to enable them. We also have Renew America's Schools grant, which is $500 million over a 4-year period that's going to flow to the most disadvantaged school districts in the country. The idea is for us to really support improvements that enhance indoor environmental quality, air quality for the teachers and the students in these buildings, and also to reduce energy costs, to put more money towards teachers and more money towards education. This is really exciting. In addition to the funding announcement, we also carved out some of the money for what we call the Energy Class Prize. And we just announced on Friday the first round winners of the Energy Class Prize. And that is, sorry about that, 25 school districts across the country that essentially are going to be funded to hire an energy manager. We realize that a lot of the challenge is that often these school districts don't have a point of contact who's knowledgeable about energy and essentially can help them navigate the funding and the opportunities. So we're going to be funding 25 energy managers, helping them go through a curriculum to learn about how to properly identify energy measures and go through the process of putting together competitive proposals. So we're excited about the Energy Class Prize and look forward to seeing that roll out. And then workforce development and training. All of these new technologies need to be coupled with training of the existing workforce, those that are already working in HVAC or they might be an electrician but not know how to install heat pumps or EV charging stations. So there's a lot of resources that SCEP is managing, 260 million total. And I talked about the 60 million down here, these 3 bullets, but the top one, what we call TREC, Training Residential Energy Contractors, is $200 million of which 85% will flow as a formula grant to the states to be actually sub-granted and create programs that train your local mom and pop type HVAC company or plumbing company, right, to get them trained up. If bill wasn't enough, 3 months later, the Inflation Reduction Act landed, and that's where SCEP was told that we will be managing 4 of those provisions that equate up to $10 billion. I just talked about the training program here, $200 million. There's also the 2 home energy rebate programs and $1 billion to support state and local governments to adopt the latest building codes or zero energy provisions, and even stretch code standards for existing buildings. Many communities are looking at the building performance standards. And in fact, DC has BEPS, which is, I think, is one of the national models that everyone's looking at. So that now there's a lot of money in that. I think for the sake of time, I'm going to move forward beyond the details of these rebates, but just to say that right now the rebates are, we are soon going to open up a guidance document for the states to apply to receive their rebate dollars, because ultimately these rebates are not administered by DOE National. They're going to be flowing to the states, and the states will run their own rebate programs. So we're working with the states on everything around income verification, because the rebates are on a sliding scale based on your income. We're also working with them on the fact that these are point of sale rebates. So they're not intended to cut a coupon out and, you know, mail it and get money back in a few months. Literally, it's off the top of the total cost of your equipment and installation, and that's either at a big box store or with a contractor. So that's pretty complex. We got to figure out these tools, and so we're working with our states and our national labs to roll out best practices for that. So all that said is, come July, the guidance document will be open from DOE. States can then start to apply to receive their funds. And we anticipate that later this year, Q4 and into early next year, states will begin to make available those rebates so that consumers in your jurisdictions can actually start to go and improve their homes, retrofit their appliances, make deep energy efficiency improvements. And I did want to underscore that these are income-based. So the rebates are intended to flow to the lowest income households in our communities. Those that are 80% area median income or less get a significant amount of potential cash benefits, up to $14,000 on just one of the rebates and up to $8,000 on another rebate. So it's considerable. These can be game-changing investments to homes, especially to people that are at highest energy burden, and we're really excited to be able to offer them. In closing, there's a lot of additional programs that we offer that are not just grants, they're not just funding opportunities, but they're technical assistance. Some of these include things like the Better Buildings and Better Climate Challenge. If you're not aware of those, I hope that you can Google that right after, and I encourage you to sign up. These are voluntary programs, and just by committing to saving energy over a certain amount of time, you can get access to technical assistance and expert advice from our national labs and from others here at DOE. We also have cohorts around Sustainable Wastewater of the Future initiative. So wastewater treatment plants and wastewater operators have a whole cohort where we're convening them on best practices on how to drive energy reduction, as well as sustainable corrections. We have a whole cohort around sustainable correction institutions all across the country. And actually there's hundreds of communities participating in these programs. We have tools for communities that are just getting started, and even those that further along the line. One of them is called State and Local Planning for Energy, and it integrates 50 different data sources and gives a community a snapshot of what their future energy profile might look like based on a whole bunch of different factors. So SLOPE is that tool, as well as the LEAD tool. This is the low-income energy affordability data, and ultimately helps visualize where within our community do we have the highest energy burdens. So it brings in energy and housing characteristics and helps us really visualize where we should flow our resources to ensure that we're driving forward not just clean energy, but equitable clean energy deployment. And in closing, the community engagement function. So the Secretary also has been looking to SCEP to lift up a brand new program at DOE for the first time ever, and it's about creating a team for community engagement. We know that there are a number of kind of controversial investments that are happening, you know, big hydrogen hubs or even just traditional projects that are going. And the real need is for us to engage our communities through this process. So we're excited to be lifting up a new team this summer. that will connect and basically be like the connective tissues amongst DOE program offices, so that you all as communities, when you're interested in reaching out to DOE to answer a question or to determine whether a project is aligned with a particular grant, well, now you'll have one front door to go to, and then we will actually help you navigate within the agency. And so we're super excited. One of the pilots that we've been rolling out in this fashion is called the Energy Communities Interagency Working Group. It's actually 11 federal agencies coming together to support communities with deep assistance in transitions. And we're focused on fossil transition communities first and foremost. And so these are communities that a good percentage of their GDP is coming from the fossil economy, or a good percentage of their workforce is embedded with the fossil economy. And so actually 25 locations around the country have already been designated and are now working with these agencies to move them towards a cleaner direction. And so go to energycommunities.gov. There's a whole website for this effort. And lastly is stay connected with us. There's a lot of information. If you're not following on LinkedIn or online, you may be missing out. And so we want to make sure that you're looking at and you're staying connected. I would encourage you to go to energy.gov/bill, put in your email address. I also encourage you to sign up for our newsletter, because we have a ton of stuff coming out, and it gives you tools and tips and obviously funny announcements so that you're aware. With that, I think I've completed my presentation. So thank you for listening in and allowing me to go a little bit over time. Hopefully this has been useful, and I look forward to any questions you might have.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Castro. As people are getting their questions up and running, I just have two quick ones. The first is, and I think you got at this a little bit towards the end, but thinking about COG, right, in our 24 jurisdictions. I know you talked a good deal about programs going to the states and then kind of trickling down. Are there opportunities for cross-jurisdictional partnering to look at some of these grant programs?
Yes, I mean, most of these programs, as you saw, are very statutorily restricted. And so we're within the lane that we're playing with. But I will mention that there are two new grant programs that I didn't mention, and can't yet, but will be coming soon. They are focused on pulling together multi-jurisdictional and multi-sectoral teams. You know, the idea of a COG and multiple townships working with their utility on a big type of electrification project, or addressing affordable housing energy efficiency, or how do we get ready for electric vehicles, right? There are ways in which the COG can play a role, a convener role, to support a more broad-based clean energy project. And so there's a specific grant coming out called Energy Futures Grants. And later this summer, we anticipate next month actually providing an announcement about the fact that will be coming out, and then opening the funding solicitations shortly thereafter. And that will invite regional planning councils, states, tribes, local governments to come together and actually work on some transformative clean energy projects. So good news is, yes, we've been able to carve out with some annual dollars, getting creative at how we enable capital for groups like the Washington COG.
Wonderful, good. And I guess that's another reason for folks to sign up for the newsletter and for your information.
There you go.
Yeah, so if people have any questions, you can raise your hands or put in the chat. One other question I had, we're going through our budget here in Montgomery County, and when our fleets management folks came to us, they were highlighting their apprenticeship program that they started here in Montgomery County, because the changes with electric vehicles and everything are happening so quickly that they're finding working with the local high schools and colleges to get apprenticeship programs in place are very important. And one of the things they noted is that a number of the grants that are out there now are either encouraging or requiring these types of apprenticeship programs. And I think it goes to the piece on one of your very first slides about towards the goal of workforce development. I didn't know if you had any other information about that piece.
Certainly. Well, the $260 million in workforce development and training dollars, really intends to flow to higher education institutions, like universities and colleges, and as well as workforce agencies. And the idea is to help to really bring about these new programs and train existing workers. Some of them are very specific statutorily to energy auditors or residential energy contractors, but there is a grant around career skills training that is more broad and could support training of EV technicians. There is a program you should be aware of called the EVITP, the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program. It's actually a curriculum that was funded by the Department of Energy to create a standard for our colleges and universities to be able to train up about electric vehicle and EV infrastructure. And one of the areas that we see more interest in is also working with labor. IBEW, as an example, is starting to incorporate EVITP curriculum into their apprenticeship training for electricians already. So it would be important as you're looking to roll something like this out to engage your local union, as well as your colleges and universities for that. The last thing I'll share is the EV work. We have a whole sustainable transportation office here at DOE, and a sub-office of them is the joint DOE and DOT office that was created because of the bipartisan infrastructure law. They're managing $7.5 billion worth of the EV infrastructure funding, $5 billion of which will go towards installing the fast chargers along the national highway system. Every 50 miles will have chargers. And the $2.5 billion has been enabled a few weeks ago for local governments to begin to apply and also fill the gaps between those highways and your local communities. So it could be at your neighborhood centers. It could create an EV charging hub. I did this in Orlando. We have a stall of 20 fast chargers in our downtown right off of the Interstate 4 so that travelers and commuters or businesses that are using EVs can all be able to charge together. Last thing I'll say is clean cities. DOE has a technical assistance cohort or technical assistance program called Clean Cities, and each region in the country has a Clean Cities point of contact, and you all can work through them on everything from codes and standards for EVs to training to, you know, a number of other technical questions you might have. So tap into Clean Cities. It's no cost, and it literally are people and experts there to field questions from local governments and others through the EV transition.
Great. Thank you. I see Vice Chair Allen has his hand up.
Thank you. I'll be real brief. So many acronyms, but thanks for the shout out for BEPS in DC for our building energy performance standards, which I do think is going to be, it's already on track, and I think it's going to be phenomenal. And if anybody wants to know more about that, I'm happy to talk more about it. We had a great hearing yesterday, actually, about the district's plans around residential electrification. And I know, at least from what we are understanding, there's going to be guidance that comes down sometime this summer that will help kind of inform from the Inflation Reduction Act how some of the funds and programs are going to be implemented at the local level, or how the local jurisdictions. Is that still on track that we should expect that guidance? Because from our standpoint, we're planning legislation and budget that we know we need to get that federal guidance probably to help inform what our final actions are going to look like. But are we still on track for a summer type of federal guidance?
Yes, sir. So two things that are important to know. One is, yes, we are on track to release the second round guidance in July. We're actually aiming for July 1st. We know that it's, you know, the early July, you know, week is a challenging week in general, so it might be shortly thereafter, but certainly early July, we're looking to unveil the guidance documents for states and local jurisdictions like DC, who will get direct, you know, formula allocations for these rebates to be able to get clarity. It is important for you to know that there's already available funds for these jurisdictions to begin to staff up and begin to work on the foundational elements you need to manage a rebate program, right? So 5% of the dollars were made available last month or in late March for you all to begin to pull down up to 5% of the funding that you're allocated to start staffing up and doing the administrative work. That will then enable the second guidance document in July that I mentioned, which will open up the full funding amounts for your rebates, right? So yes, that info will be flowing soon. These rebates are a bit challenging because, again, they're point of sale rebates and they're based on income. And so you have to have income verification, you know, either at the dinner table with the contractor or at the big box store when you're going to buy a heat pump water heater, right? And so we need to find mechanisms. We are working now with our national labs to create a standard method for states and local jurisdictions to do the income verification. We're working closely with the IRS. We're trying to plug in their data set into a tool so that somebody can essentially, before going to a big box store or welcoming a contractor, go to a site, be able to provide some basic information, and based on their income verification, they can get a kind of a QR code, so to speak, that would be able to be tagged as a voucher, either at the big box store, at the contractor, that would allow them to reduce that rebate amount from the ledger, from the quote, right? So there's some complexity here, which is why the rebates aren't available today. And we're working very closely with NASIO and other partners to make sure that your input into how this should flow is taken into account and is incorporated into the guidance. We're excited about these resources. We think it could be a real game changer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Let's see, I am not seeing any other hands or questions in the chat. Excited to hear about the programs and the rebates, and looking forward to getting more information. I'll remind my colleagues that the PowerPoint will be available, and if your staffs weren't able to join us today, I know we'll have a recording. Mr. Castro, did you want to say one other thing?
One last thing is just an encouragement to work as closely as you can with your state energy offices. I know sometimes that may be challenging. Certainly coming from Florida, it was, but I still found common ground and ways to work with them. But as you saw, as I presented, a lot of our resources, just based on statute, flow into the states, and the states are required to kind of subgrant a lot of those dollars. So the more that you're on their radar about projects that you want to collaborate with them on, I think the more competitive you will be to bring those dollars down. I wasn't aware of how important the state energy offices were before I got into this role, and every point I get, I want to make it. So encourage you to do that. And again, thank you for this opportunity to share.
Great. Thank you very much. Terrific. We will now move on to agenda item 10. That's our fiscal year 2024 work program and budget. For that, we'll be turning it over to Mr. Mercer and Ms. Mussog and our COG Deputy Executive Director, Kanti Srinkath, to brief us on the board proposed fiscal year 2024 work program and budget. After that presentation, the board will be asked to adopt a resolution, R18-2023, and this was recommended to the board by the COG's Budget and Finance Committee. So now I'll turn it over to Mr. Mercer.
Thank you. I will be brief. We've had a lot in this this meeting so far, but just kind of generally from a high level, we'll hand it off to Julie to get in the nuts and bolts, and Kanti will dive into some of the programmatic details. But I think you'll find it's a well-balanced budget. It is mindful of your respective budget calendars. The October and last October, COG approved the FY24 dues for your local jurisdictions, so that you could go into your own budget deliberations with all of the 1,000 other things you're considering with those dues already in front of you. You'll see, looking back to last year, last couple of years and this year, we did what everyone did, was we tightened our belts, and our budget reflected some cuts and putting some things on pause to get through kind of the height of COVID. I think you'll find that we are returning to a healthy and normal budget for COG. One-time expenses versus reoccurring expenses. I'm sure your budget team's talking to you about that. We are mindful not to commit to new programs that have an ongoing cost. We don't have any new programs in this budget. I will say we have some increase. One of the highlights is TPB. We just heard some of the new federal funding. Finally, our TPBs across the country got long-awaited and deserved investment. So we're getting $2 million more per year to TPB. There is a 10% or $200,000 match, and that announcement and funding came at a point in the process where we pull that from a couple different places, and I think we'll look to level set that next year. But all in all, it's a budget that shows that COG is back and doing the things and working on the topics that you all expect us to. I think next year, as a preview, we'll be looking at salaries, we'll be looking at compression issues, which I know you all do, and we also have our physical office building that we'll be working some issues through our budget and finance committee. But this is a year to normalize. And with that, I'll hand it over to Julie to dive into the specifics.
Thank you, Clark. So turning to slide 3, you can see that the proposed FY24 budget is $57.5 million. This is $3.2 million more, or about 6% higher than the current year budget. This is driven primarily by the additional funding for existing programs, in particular TPB. The FY24 budget, as previewed by the Budget and Finance Committee and proposed here, reflects prior year restricted fund balance use of about $600,000. This is related to the regional housing analysis, air quality, and public safety funds, and a use of undesignated funds of about $172,500. And this is related to the required federal funding match for TPB that Clark alluded to. Page 5 of the work program has more detail on this. Moving on to slide 4. The complete FY24 budget, FY24 work program and budget is about a 70-page document, and there's a link included under the publications on the May 10th Board of Directors webpage. Slide 4 here details the revenues by program area. The first of which is transportation planning, which is 39% of the total COG budget, or $22.2 million in operating revenue. The bulk of this is core MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization work budget, that's already been approved by the TPB board. Transportation operations is funding for the commuter connections and some pass-through funding for enhanced mobility, and thus transportation operations about 21%. And total transportation programs represent about 60% of COG's budget. Water resources, environmental resources, climate and energy, and air quality together total $10.2 million, or about 17% of the total COG budget, of which $2.7 million is pass-through related to an additional Amtrak engine repower project that we expect to get in fiscal 24. Homeland Security and Public Safety is 17% of the revenue, or about $9.8 million in pass-through and operating funds. Pass-through funds are primarily related to UASI and securing the cities. Community planning and services, strategic initiatives, and member services make up the remaining 5% of the budget and represent core work supporting the MPO and long-range forecasts and strategic initiatives like housing and health planning. Okay, next slide. Slide 5 details the sources of the $57.5 million in revenue. And as in prior years, the single largest source is the federal government at 60% of our funding. This funds the MPO transportation operations, including enhanced mobility pass-through grants and some FEMA UASI pass-through as well. The second largest source of funding at 18% is state and district revenue. This revenue is primarily for funding commuter connections, the transportation match for the core MPO work, and environmental work. And then the third largest source at 9% is member dues. Most of these funds are used as a match to leverage federal and state and other regional project funds, and is the primary source of support for our work in housing and health, as an example. And our leverage ratio for federal funds is about 8.1 to every dollar from member dues. And on slide 6, I'll turn it back over to Clark.
Thank you. And we shared this last meeting. One of the projects out of the gates when I came on board a couple months ago was to try to consolidate into one handout what the member benefits are for your jurisdictions. And I'm happy to come present and talk to your colleagues. You know, when you do this for a while, you assume people know what you're doing. And that your work is generally known across the region. And the reality is folks are busy, and it's not the case. COG, I learn every day that we run a program, whether it's Bike to Work or whether it's some of our clean water projects, whether it's our foster work, that I was unaware that COG is behind. Our commuter connections, a lot of the van rides to get our seniors and folks with special needs home, or to the grocery, to restaurants, that's a pass-through that COG runs. And the list goes on and on and on. So we handed out at the last meeting a pretty, I think, a pretty good, crisp document that uses assertive language to demonstrate the wide range of things that we do above and beyond some of the networking, which we all know we convene, and providing good, sharp data on a wide range of items. And so, you know, one, I just wanted to say that I'm very, very grateful for the your support of COG, but I'm also very happy to come out and talk to your colleagues and get their feedback. The cooperative purchasing program, that's the last bullet. You know, the first iteration of that was the COG rider clause, which is still used, but this is a distinct and relatively new program that has matured over the years and is now making money for COG, but it leverages the buying power of all of our jurisdictions on commodities that we all use, whether that's diesel, water, bottled water. It can go out and procure some very specific high-end equipment that your locality may not be able to procure on its own. And, you know, I give the example, there's a pretty high-tech piece of equipment in the Homeland Security space, and it saved, I believe it was Arlington County, $800,000 last year alone, right? Which more than pays their dues and then some. So that is a program over the next year that we're going to look to grow, but also make sure that we are communicating that program to the right folks within your jurisdiction, so you can realize exactly the scope of what you're able to purchase through the cooperative purchasing program to save money. And then the next slide, you know, highlights slide 7, just some of our FY24 work program. I think you all know this. Chair Stewart has talked. This is the year we have set some aggressive goals in equitable job growth, in transportation and transit, housing, and climate change. It's a year to really go from setting those goals to accelerate action to accomplishing those. Federal funding, we just had Chris Castro with DOE speak. We're having transportation speak next month, but kind of laser focused on working with your jurisdictions to pursue some of this record funding. The economy, we just hosted a pretty big regional forum with the National Capital Planning District, our friends at GSA and OPM on past Friday, on kind of what the long-term impacts of COVID are and how we can be proactive and positive about COVID being an inflection point, but realize that particularly our federal partners are having a dramatic effect on the region's economy, and that we need to recognize that and figure out what that path looks like for the entire region, not just the district. And that segues into the last bullet point there for 24, which is Metro and WMATA funding. Certainly, transit across the country is in a difficult spot. I think the secretary yesterday made some nice comments about being there for Metro and transit across the country in the president's budget. But certainly, I think WMATA, given its unique governance structure and funding, is in a different position than some of its peers, and we're going to have to work through that over the next year or two, just like you all did in 18, providing real leadership to get that dedicated funding on the capital side. We've got a big hill to climb over the next year or so, many months, and WMATA's at the top of the list for the work program next year. And now, Conti, on slide 8, I will hand it off to you to jump into some of those programs.
Certainly, thank you, Clark. So these are some of the big ticket items on certainly not all of the activities that your staff are undertaking at COG. Starting with transportation, Visualize 2050 is one of the region's big undertaking. It is the region's next long-range transportation plan, and this documents the transportation projects, programs, and policies that are planned to be implemented by the local and state agencies over the next 25 years, between now and 2050. This year, the TPB has chosen a new approach to develop this federally required document. It's an approach where the TPB is asking all of its member agencies to go back and re-examine every project and program that is in the current plan, and to re-examine to see if this is indeed the best mix of projects that we can come up with to address our mobility and accessibility, but while also advancing our other goals, particularly our climate goals, our bringing jobs and housing closer together goal, transit-oriented communities, those sorts of things. So that would be a big undertaking for this upcoming fiscal year through COG. The second one is enhanced mobility. This is another program where COG serves as the designated recipient of federal funds. And this is funding that is made available mostly to nonprofit organizations that provide transportation services to older adults and people with disabilities. And this calendar year, COG will be looking to distribute about $11 million in funding. And this is a 50% increase from previous years because the bipartisan infrastructure law significantly increased funding for this program. Under public safety, there are lots of activities here, but one we would like to highlight particularly is an ongoing activity where COG provides the management of several cross-jurisdictional public safety information sharing projects. The projects, for example, are the fingerprint identification systems, or the license plate readers, and there is also the Linux program that provides rapid electronic access to public safety across a number of federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. Another one is the electric vehicles. Again, this board is very engaged in activities on several fronts to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change. Last fall, the board charged staff to establish a regional working group so that the 24 member agencies and jurisdictions can coordinate in deploying electric vehicle infrastructure. And a new regional EV deployment work group has been established. In fact, they have already met once this year, and I know that they will be quite busy moving forward, particularly with the $7.5 billion of federal funding that's now available for EV infrastructure deployment. And the last item on this slide, but certainly not the least, you may be aware that the region had been previously found to be in non-attainment of the most recent federal air quality standards for ground level ozone. The data from the past 2 years indicate that the region has now attained this tougher ozone standards. So that's certainly something to feel good about. But having attained the standards, federal law requires us to now develop a plan that shows that we will be able to retain this standard for at least the next 10 years. So that is called a maintenance plan, and that will be one of the big undertakings under MVAC that COG staff will be supporting. With that, I'll turn it back to Julie for the next one.
Thank you, Kanti. Slide 9 just has a few highlights from the budget. First of all, the member dues rate increase was 2 cents, just as a reminder, over the FY23 rate, which was ratified by the board back in October of 2022. And as Clark mentioned, this is really to help give you guys guidance for your budgets going into the next fiscal year. Operating revenue increased by $3.1 million, or about 7.5% over the prior year work program. And this was driven by the additional funding for existing programs, primarily historic new funding for TPP. Subrecipient pass-through is increasing by about $200,000, or just about 1% over FY23. So pretty level there. And we also are anticipating a second Amtrak engine repower project. And importantly, the reserves are also fully funded at policy levels. And I'm going to get into more detail about those on page 10. So the board designated reserves. In fiscal year 24, we expect to maintain the operating reserve at the projected FY23 year-end balance of $5.2 million. This is reflective of a balanced budget for FY24 with zero use of operating reserves. The reserve will remain funded at 100% of policy level. Based on COG's current 5-year capital plan, the capital reserve is forecasted to be funded at $4.8 million at the end of fiscal 24. And this is 100% funded per policy. The capital expenditure plan is a rolling 5-year plan with the next iteration to come to the board in September, and we'll seek your approval at that time. We are projecting the use of undesignated funds in FY24. This is due to the substantial increase in federal funding for TPP, which has the 10% required match from member dues. However, the undesignated fund balance remains healthy and is projected to be at a level of about $700,000 at the end of fiscal 24. And this undesignated fund balance, we were able to achieve that through some belt tightening during the COVID period, some cutbacks on spending. And so we was fortunate that we have this available to sort of meet this extra, very welcome funding from the federal government on the transportation planning side. So bottom line is that we are good on reserves. We have adequate funding for any economic uncertainty. And although it's not part of the operating budget, we are on solid ground with our pension. Despite a very rough year in the market last year, our pension as of 12/31 was 105% funded on an actuarial basis and 99% funded on a market value basis. So that's very fortunate. So overall, we remain fiscally healthy, feel that this is a good budget that funds programs the way we need them funded, but also a very responsible budget given the circumstances. So I'll turn it over to Clark to sort of wrap things up at this point.
Well, just a huge thank you, Julie, to you and your team and members. You see the budget approval process there in front of you. If approved, this would start July 1st. The Budget and Finance Committee has seen it, has voted to move it here to the full board, and we'll hand things back to the chair at this point and take any questions with Julie.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for that presentation. And Julie, in particular, thank you again. You know, I did have the role of Secretary Treasurer for a number of years, and now being the board chair, I've seen the evolution of the reports that you provide on the budget and the work program, and each year you improve them. And so I just want to say thank you very much and encourage everyone to take a deep dive into that. Before we entertain questions, I'd ask that we have a motion and a second to approve resolution R18 2020-2023. Do I have a motion?
Gross moves approval.
Supervisor Gross motioned, and a second from Mayor Newton. Any questions on the work program and budget? Let's see, Mayor Jordan, I think that's your hand, correct?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the presentation. Really important strategic initiatives. And so I just had a sort of a general question about well, some of the out goals and how we're going to go about reconciling some of the the goal attainment in out years between Vision 2050 with the TPB and air quality goals and MWAC, and just in general, the Region United Forward strategic goals. I know I'd just like to hear a little discussion about how we're going to kind of work together with a big influx of funds for TPB. I guess it's going to come back to the board, or ultimately it will, but I wonder if staff could just briefly touch on how we can go about reconciling these different committee priorities in out years.
Do you want to?
Sure. Mayor, that's it's a good question, and I think it's one that when I came on board, it was a topic of kind of my interviews of kind of how I saw my role, kind of taking the handoff from Chuck, and what I have said, at a very high level, right, that there's a spectrum that COG operates on, and at one end is providing good, sharp, clean data that you policymakers can use to inform decisions. And that's on the under end of the spectrum, and respecting kind of the fact that COG does not get political, that COG has a lot of soft power and does not make decisions per se. Obviously TPB, they do, but we need to move along the spectrum from providing that data to encouraging our members to have some tough decisions and take some tough votes, whether it be on ozone, carbon emission reduction. And I think, Councilman Allen talked about BEPS as a good example of what the district's doing to address that. We've seen some really good discussion on affordable housing. We've set affordable housing goals. How are we going to get there? Respecting that not all the jurisdictions are starting at the same point. Arlington, for example, had and Chair Dorsey just got through a pretty well-publicized debate on how to effectuate affordable housing within Arlington. So I view kind of my role in the next couple of years of moving all of us along that spectrum from, okay, we've set some goals that are bold. How are we going to get there? And obviously, money's a big component of that. But we can. It depends on the topic, right? I think we'll dive into Metro and Transit on July 14th with Randy Clark, but that's going to be its own campaign, for lack of a better word, and we have to kind of level set in terms of where we are. But on each of those, it's going to be investing in our team here at COG to make sure we've got the experts and they stay here at COG. That's part of the budget study we're doing right now and looking at compression issues. I know that everyone faces compression issues in their localities, but we're going to need some of the smartest, and we've got some of the smartest folks in the region working with your jurisdictions on whatever the aspect of Region Forward is. But that's kind of where we are now. We've hit some initial goals, but there's a lot of work to be done to go from where we are to where we hope to be.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Supervisor Gross.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to do a little highlight on the reserves and the policy, the reserve policy that we have. There was a time when we really didn't have reserves that were quite as robust as they are. And I've always kept a close eye on those because I was active in getting them in there years ago. So I just really wanted to sort of highlight the fact that we've been very disciplined over the years to maintain our reserve policy and continue to feed that reserve. And I would hope that that will continue in the coming years. I won't be around to watch it quite so closely, but I am very proud of that. That was one of the things we did at COG that has stood us in good stead. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Supervisor Gross, for raising that and having done so over the years. I think it's incredibly important, and thank you for all your work. And you leave many legacies, not that you're going anywhere yet, but I just want to, note that, having healthy reserves at COG is definitely one of the things that you were able to accomplish. So thank you so much for that. Okay, seeing no other hands or questions, I'll call for the vote now to approve resolution R18-2023. Are there any abstentions or nay votes? Okay, seeing none, the motion passes. Okay, we're going to move right along. We have two more big items for us in the second hour of our meeting. The first is a follow-up from the conversation we had last meeting. We'll be discussing the local cooperative forecast on long-term growth in employment, population, and households in the region. Today's presentation is going to detail the jurisdictional level growth forecast and provide additional insights into what growth we can expect to see in our region. Just so everyone knows, the forecasts have been approved by the COG Planning Directors Technical Advisory Committee, and this is all the work of over a year of work and reviews by that committee. And we're going to be briefed today by Paul Desjardins and COG Senior Regional Planner Greg Goodwin to present the forecast. I know there was a question last week about whether or not we would have the presentation and vote in one meeting, and we really took that under advisement. And so what we're doing today is receiving the presentation, having the conversation, and then we set the vote for our next June meeting so that people are able to answer follow-up questions if you have any in the interim. So with that, I'll hand it over to Paul and Greg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very pleased to be here with you. And as you said, we had a very robust discussion about this item last month. I'm also mindful of the time. The next item is actually something from a member of my team, so I'm actually very mindful of wanting to get to that discussion as well. I'll mention also in your packet, there is a transmittal memo from me, a brief transmittal memo. The summary tables have been sent to you in advance. In a moment, I'll turn to my colleague, Greg. He'll walk you through some of the findings from what the jurisdictional forecasts show, and then I'll wrap up quickly with sort of a summary and next steps. As you said, Madam Chair, there is no action on this item today. Next slide, please. Very quickly, I cannot emphasize this enough. The forecasts do come from your jurisdictions. This is the work of your local planning staffs. It's that green box to the far right. These are the official projections from each of your staffs, and we want to applaud them for the tremendous work that they've done for this. Next slide, please. Remind you again, we shared this with you last month. This is just a very high-level summary of what there are in the projections. We're going to add about 1 million jobs, about 1.5 million people, and about 700,000 households over the next 30 years. Next slide, please. And then again, this was sort of the level set we shared with you due to the impacts of COVID. When you compare the new projections that Greg is going to present to you in a moment, you'll see again that employment through all the forecast years, largely due to the ongoing impacts of COVID, were about 200,000 jobs lower than what we had been previously forecasting for each of those forecast years. We still expect growth, but again, as we said, this has been a bit of a reset. Next slide, please, Greg.
Great, thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. So just the following charts that you're about to see are all based on the summary tables that you have received in your COG board meeting packet. So let me go ahead and proceed. So this next chart is the employment forecast by jurisdiction, and the chart is sorted in descending order. So the jurisdictions with the most jobs in 2020 are sorted at the top. So you will see the District of Columbia contains the greatest number of jobs in 2020, about 786,000 jobs. And it expects that the most growth is going to also occur in the District of Columbia, about 236,000 jobs between 2020 and 2050. Next slide. So again, this chart is the population forecast by jurisdiction. This chart is sorted in descending order based on population in 2020. And as you will see, Fairfax County has the largest population in 2020 with about 1.1, 1.2 million people. But you will note Prince George's County would see the largest 2020 to 2050 population increase of about 237,000 people. Next slide. And finally, this chart is the household forecast by jurisdiction. This chart is also sorted in descending order based on the number of households in 2020. Fairfax County contains the greatest number of households in 2020 with about 418,000, but the District of Columbia anticipates the largest increase between 2020 and 2050 with about 129,000 more households. Next slide, please. What is striking about this slide is that the inner suburbs, and I'll note that by its color, the gold or the yellow, if you look at it for each of the columns, the inner suburbs project the greatest increase in jobs, population, and households. But when you look at the outer jurisdictions, which are the red segments, they anticipate the fastest rates of employment at 44% and population growth at about 33%. But if you look at the inner jurisdictions, would see the greatest rate of household growth at about 45%, due in part to the anticipated growth in the district. Next slide, please. For employment, Northern Virginia will add approximately 445,000 jobs, or about 32% between 2020 and 2050. And for population, in the middle column, the Maryland suburbs will add about 658,000 people, or about 27% between 2020 and 2050. And finally, for households, the third column, Northern Virginia will add about 288,000 households, or about 31% between 2020 and 2050. Next slide.
Just to wrap up again, as Greg said, when we're looking, we've heard these points, but again, the district would see the greatest increase in jobs among all jurisdictions. Fairfax is the most populous, but Prince George's would see the largest increase in population over the next 30 years. Fairfax contains the greatest number of households in the region, but the district, as Greg said, would add the greatest number of households going forward over the next 30 years. Next slide, please. The inner suburbs would see the greatest amount of growth, about 428,000 jobs, 663,000 people, and almost 280,000 households. The outer suburbs would see the faster rates of growth, given that, building on a smaller base, about a 44% increase in jobs and almost a 33% increase in population. And then lastly, Northern Virginia would see the largest growth in jobs and households, but the Maryland jurisdictions would see the largest growth in population, largely due to the strong growth anticipated in Prince George's and Montgomery counties. Next slide, please. So next steps, again, today is May 10th. We are briefing you on the jurisdictional forecast. As you said, Madam Chair, the planning directors did approve the forecast after their discussions last month after your meeting. During the month of May, board members have the opportunity to share the new forecast with your local boards and councils. And if you have specific questions about your jurisdiction, obviously you can discuss them with your local planning departments. As you said, Madam Chair, we'll come back next month at the June 14th meeting. We'd assume we would actually have action on the forecast then. And then upon approval, next month, the forecast will be widely used and visualized 2050 for water quality, water flow forecasting, water consumption, air quality, CEPC, a whole host of COG programs. But again, these are the official local projections, so they would be used for local capital improvements programming as well. So that is it, Madam Chair. Greg and I are here to answer questions you have, and hopefully we'll be able to get you back on schedule a little bit.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I see Mr. Madaleno from Montgomery County has his hand up already, so we'll go right to him.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So 2 quick questions. When you looked at the population, it's growing faster in the, it will grow most in the in the Maryland suburbs, but households will grow faster in the Virginia suburbs. Is that just the difference between couples with children settling in Maryland, singles settling in Arlington and Alexandria?
Very much so. In fact, when you look at the actual housing production, the district is actually going to add more among all the individual jurisdictions. The district's actually going to add more housing units than any jurisdiction. And that's something that we've seen borne out in our annual report on multifamily construction. The district has just seen a tremendously robust production in multifamily rental units. With population, you're exactly correct. It's very much a function of average household size assumptions. Prince George's County staff, for example, is looking at less of a decline in average household size over the next 30 years, which goes to explain why they're seeing such a large increase compared to other, not such a large, but comparative to other jurisdictions who are seeing a declining household size. So you were spot on with both of those.
And then one follow-up, one additional question. When you talked about job growth being most in DC, because of our experience with remote work, is that really just job growth, meaning the job is in DC because the paycheck will emanate from an office with a DC address, even though that actual job, the holder may never set foot in the District of Columbia while they're employed?
So it's a good question. And the long answer is we're all still looking to see, well, what does the new normal look like with regards to return to the office? We do believe most of the job production will actually occur in the district. There's evidence that people are beginning to come back. There's movement, obviously, to encourage federal workers to come back. But there's also a little bit of seasonality. I mean, these are long-term projections. I should have prefaced it by saying that we're looking at this over the long term. But to the heart of your question, in the near term, when is the new normal? We're about ready to roll into the summer months, but I think there's a growing consensus that in the fall, you will start seeing this more significant return to office, whatever that actually looks like.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Remember, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or raise your hand. Paul, I had a question when we were looking at the forecast last month. Myself, Mayor Newton, I think some of the other council board members had questions regarding whether or not we could disaggregate where we were, the sectors in which we were seeing job growth, and that may not have been possible just in the last few weeks, but curious where we are with that.
Monica, could you pop up the slides again and go to that extra slide? That's a very good question, Madam Chair. Go to this last slide, slide 15. Yeah, if you could do that full screen. Greg, would you like to comment on this? This is some research Greg has done, and then I have one other resource I can talk about in a second.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I did reach out to the Maryland State Department of Commerce. They did have some additional resources, I believe, that is connected to not only the life science sector, but some of the other employment sectors. There's little information, but we're still looking into it in terms of projections. But what I wanted to show by this slide is that there is some information. There is an online mapping tool, and what you see on the slide are all the life sciences employers within Montgomery County. And this is information that you can obtain for any jurisdiction, county, and the city of Baltimore for Maryland, which I think is an excellent source of being able to visualize this data. And yeah, so I think this is something that we will continue to look into for you and for Mayor Newton as well.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And we'll look into it. And I'm not seeing any other hands or anything. And thank you, Mr. DeJarzan, for helping us pick up some time in our agenda. And just remind my colleagues that we will be voting on adopting these in June. So please take a look at them and send any questions in you have. And thank you again, both for your work on this. All right, our last item today is item 12, homelessness in the metropolitan Washington area results and analysis from the annual point in time count. And for our next item, we're going to be briefed by this. This was completed by COG's Homeless Services Committee. The draft reports was sent out to everyone by email, and we're going to put the link in the chat. And I just want to note, Jeff King has been putting a lot of great links regarding EV and other things in the chat for folks to check out. Today, we're going to hear from the committee chair, Elizabeth Young, with the Community Partnership for the Prevention of Homelessness in the District of Columbia. Following her presentation, we will hear insights from Prince George's County, Renee Enser Pope, and Arlington County's Trina Van. And I just want to say, this year I was able to take part in the point in time contact, and I just want to thank everyone who is involved in that effort, and look forward to the presentation today. So Ms. Young, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Stewart, Vice Chairs Luskin, Allen, and members of the board. My name is Elizabeth Young, and on behalf of COG's Homeless Services Committee, thank you for the opportunity to present the results from the 23rd annual point in time count of persons experiencing homelessness in the metropolitan Washington area. I also just want to take a moment to thank the 9 participating jurisdictions for providing their data for today's presentation, and also a big thank you to COG staff, particularly Hillary Chapman and Sharon Wilkerson, for all their work on this report. The point in time count is the one-day annual enumeration of sheltered and unsheltered persons who are experiencing homelessness in the region on that day. This year it was conducted on January 25th. The count is a snapshot of literally homeless single adults, families with children, and unaccompanied youth living in shelters, transitional housing programs, or in an unsheltered location on the night of PIT. So unsheltered meaning they were staying in the streets or parks or cars or campsites within the region. And just a point of clarification before we go into this table, the count does not include persons who are at risk of becoming homeless due to evictions or living in some sort of doubled up or tripled up situation. We're just looking at those who would be considered literally homeless by the definition set by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And then in addition to reporting on households that were experiencing literal homelessness on the night of PIT, we also report on the number of households that were formerly homeless and living in some kind of permanent supportive housing or using, rapid rehousing resources and or other forms of permanent housing. So a couple of notes, and then I'm going to get into this table that we're seeing here. This was the third count since the declaration of the COVID-19 pandemic, and this enumeration was conducted following CDC and local health department guidance. This year, it did resemble much closer to the counts held prior to the pandemic, as many of the jurisdictions welcome back volunteer surveyors to join their outreach workers for the unsheltered portion of the count. And then last point before going into the table, the primary means by which the count is conducted is electronically. So while we include, of course, those living in an unsheltered location, all of our jurisdictions maintain a homeless management information system, which is a database of all the shelter programs and transitional housing programs operating in our jurisdictions. And about 85% of the people counted in 2023 were in those programs and pulled from those databases. Okay, so let's look at this table here. So the table that you're seeing shows the count of people experiencing literal homelessness by jurisdiction for both 2022 and 2023. So as you can see, we've had an increase in total persons. This year, there were 8,944 persons counted compared to 7,605 in 2022. A very important note, all 9 COCs experienced an increase in the number of persons counted experiencing homelessness this year. So that is rare and notable. Usually we might see a mix of increases or reductions from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, in any given year. So I think that this really highlights that this is a region-wide trend. The change between 2022 and 2023 represents an 18% increase in persons between years. And 18% increase compared to last year. Last year's was the lowest count on record since the beginnings in the past 22 enumerations. So, we are seeing kind of ticking back upward now. In general, we think that this year's increase is attributable to the end of the pandemic era tenant reductions and, emergency housing assistance funding that was provided by the federal government. Homelessness can sometimes be a lagging indicator of larger economic trends, so that might be some of what we're seeing now as well. We can move to the next slide. So this table here shows a household composition. It's broken down by the number of single adults or households without children, and then families and the number of persons in those households with adults and children. And then the final column there is for unaccompanied minors. So those would be 17-year-olds or under who are without their parent or guardian. Since 2019, the region had a 3% increase in the total number of single adults and a 25% decrease in the number of persons and families. So this trend of consecutive annual decreases in families experiencing homelessness was reversed in 2023. So we've seen those decreases, from year to year. But we saw an increase in families this year, and it's still below the number of families counted in 2029. I see a hand raised. I'm happy to answer a quick question and then continue through.
Just a really quick question. I'm sorry,
Yes.
Madam Chair, do you want me to wait?
If it's super quick.
super quick. I'm sorry if you said this. How much of this is driven by immigrants who have been coming to our community, and was this a blip because of the buses that were people being shipped here?
So I think what I can just briefly to answer that, we don't collect information on, my immigration status or citizenship or residency in our survey or in our HMISs. So I don't have a good answer to that question. I can tell you that in the district, the mayor's office has set up a specific office to help address those families and individuals coming through, and they are often, routed from the homeless services system. So I don't really have a good answer as to the increases being attributable to that. I hope that is sufficient. So just if I can go back to the slide really quick. Children represented 61% of all the persons who were in homeless families in the 2023 count. And I want to make a note on children in households. So you may see other numbers from the education systems on, children experiencing homelessness. So public schools do track the number of children experiencing homelessness on a cumulative basis throughout the school year, compared to just this one-day snapshot at the point in time count. But a really quick kind of definitional distinction, the U.S. Department of Education has a different definition for homelessness than HUD does. So that definition is much more broad and includes households that would be in a doubled up situation. So you may see different numbers. This is specific to that HUD definition and that one night snapshot. And overall, the region noted a 9% decrease in the total number of persons counted as experiencing literal homelessness between the 2019 and the 2023 enumerations. And just one more note on 2019, it marked the first time ever that the region counted fewer than 10,000 persons experiencing homelessness. And I think this helps to demonstrate that changes made at the systems level in some of the COCs has resulted in fewer people experiencing homelessness despite the end of the public health emergency. Next slide. Okay, so this slide represents single adults in the metropolitan Washington region who reported meeting HUD's definition for chronic homelessness on the night of the count. In 2023, 27 families were counted as chronically homeless, and we had no unaccompanied youth who were counted as chronically homeless. And just so you know, per the HUD definition, a person is considered chronically homeless if they have a disabling condition and they have either been continuously homeless for a year or more, or has had at least 4 episodes of homelessness in the past 3 years. The episodes have to cumulatively add up to at least 12 months. So we're looking at very vulnerable individuals here. So out of all 9 COCs, there were 1,738 individuals experiencing chronic homelessness. Since 2019, the incidence of chronic homelessness has decreased by 4% as well. As we're pulling that slide back up, I'll just continue with my talking points. This is attributable to a variety of factors. Strategies such as using a housing first approach and a by name list to prioritize chronically homeless persons are in use in this region. Those are best practices, and we have several COCs, really using those best practices, and they've been proven effective in reducing chronic homelessness nationwide. And I also want to note that access to permanent, deeply affordable housing will also make a difference in ensuring the region is able to make sustained progress towards reducing chronic homelessness and overall meeting our common goal of making homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. Next slide. Okay, so these charts here show the racial demographic profile of those counted in the point in time count and those in our population in the region. So, the region COCs report on demographic data of people experiencing homelessness in our communities to better understand disparate impacts of the drivers of homelessness and to address gaps in our regional system response. As shown in this slide, both single adults and adults in family are most likely to report their racial identity is Black or African American. Among single adults, 71% experiencing homelessness responded that they identified as Black, compared to the region's population where only 25% of persons identify as Black or African American. The root cause of this disproportionality of people of color in the homeless services system is, simply put, a legacy of institutional and systemic racism that impacts our communities to this day. In recognition of this racial disparity, the 9 participating jurisdictions in COG's Homeless Services Committee began a collaboration in June 2021 with the consulting firm C4 Innovations. They're a nationwide leader in addressing racial inequities and homelessness. This collaboration has examined our homeless services systems both locally and at the regional level to find opportunities for us to better align our strategies and ensure that we're creating a more racially equitable approach to ending homelessness in the region. And we just received a copy of the report's final recommendations, and so looking forward to sharing those with you later this year. And next slide. In 2023, the number of persons experiencing homelessness and having served in the armed forces increased by 35 persons, or 11%. This is a relatively small increase across the region, but it reflects that larger trend that we shared earlier of these increases. Compared to the count 5 years ago in 2019, the region has reduced the number of homeless veterans by 21%. So this year, slightly more than half, or about 5 out of 9 COCs saw reductions in the total number of veterans counted in 2023 compared to 2019. So a little bit different from the overall total trend there. This overall reduction in veteran homelessness is attributable to the targeted funding from the federal government to assist veterans in the form of VASH and SSBF vouchers for permanent housing. SSBF vouchers are the supportive housing and supportive services for veteran families voucher. And next slide. Beginning in 2018, the region's COCs noted an increasing number of older adults were, accessing their systems. So this slide represents single adults experiencing homelessness during the 2023 count compared to the 2 counts prior, showing different age categories of those single adults. So we have our transitional age youth category, 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, and then 55 up. So it's important to note that older adults experiencing homelessness, already have medical ages typically that exceed their biological ages. So they can have, age-related medical conditions, things like decreased mobility and cognitive decline. And, it's typically assumed that they're on par with their house counterparts who are 20 years older. The average life expectancy for an older person experiencing homelessness is estimated at around age 42 to 52 years old, compared to 78 in the general population. So I hope this just highlights to you the impacts of experiencing homelessness on a person's, physical well-being. So this is one of the reasons why our region's COCs are tracking the number of adults aged 55 and older, really to get a sense of how that share of the population might be changing over time. In 2023, there were 3 adults aged 90 years old or above counted experiencing homelessness, and one of those 90-year-olds were counted in an unsheltered location. Just one other note on aging in the homeless population. Most shelter systems in the metropolitan Washington area aren't really properly equipped to serve older adults who may have, extreme medical conditions, cancer, or suffering from things like cognitive decline. And as the baby boomer generation ages, we anticipate this segment of the adults experiencing homelessness to continue to grow. And final slide. Thanks. So, this slide here is our rates of housing folks, in permanent housing programs. So permanent housing is the ultimate solution to ending homelessness. And I can't emphasize that enough. This includes unsubsidized and subsidized housing programs like permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing. And we're making really great progress in the region in placing persons who experience homelessness into some form of permanent housing. So this bar chart here highlights the increase in the overall number of formerly homeless individuals and families who have been placed in one of those permanent housing locations compared to the literally homeless point in time count since 2019. So the orange bars there is our point in time count, so 8,944 for this year. And then the blue bar shows you, over the past year, how many people are in these permanent housing programs. So it's almost 30,000, households are being provided permanent housing services. So in 2023, there was a 25% increase in permanent housing placements compared to 2019. And I also really want to highlight for you all the change between 2022 and 2023. So even though we had an 18% increase in the total number of persons counted at the point in time count, so that orange bar there, since the last count, we housed individuals and families at a much higher rate than we did the previous year. So, at an increased rate of 19% in actually housing people. So, the significant number of people that we placed in some form of permanent housing has really constrained the incidence of homelessness in the region and has helped prevent it from growing unchecked since 2019. And then also, the end of the pandemic era housing programs. This housing strategy reinforces the need to provide more affordable housing resources to people experiencing homelessness and to, just low-income households in the region as well. It's crucial to prevent people from experiencing homelessness, and having adequate resourcing will help us to move people as quickly as possible if they aren't able to be prevented from losing their housing. So if I can leave you with one big takeaway from the slide, we're doing really good work in moving households through our system and into permanent housing, right, as is indicated in this chart. But we're challenged by the amount of inflow into our systems and, really the availability of permanent housing resources to address that inflow. Just one last thing to mention, as the economy recovers, we need to provide robust workforce development programs as well to assist low-wage and low-skilled workers to secure better paying jobs in order to afford the high cost of housing in the region. So we should celebrate the hard work of the region's 9 COCs, not just on that one day in January, but throughout this past year to make this steady progress and ensuring that the experience of homelessness is brief, rare, and non-recurring. Thank you again for the opportunity to present the results from this year's point in time count of the region's residents experiencing homelessness. And please note that at the end of the report that you all should have received, there are summaries from the 9 participating jurisdictions, which provides more detail on some of their individual PIT results, their local homeless services, and individual accomplishments throughout the year. And now to share some local perspectives from Maryland and Virginia, I'm pleased to be joined today with my esteemed colleagues in the committee and COC leaders, Renee Inzer-Pope from Prince George's County and Trina Van from Arlington County. And after they speak, we would be happy to answer any questions you have within the time we have available. Thank you, Chair Stewart, Vice Chairs Lusk and Allen.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Young. I do want to do a note on time because we are at like about 8 minutes. So Ms. Young and Ms. Van, I don't want to cut your time short, but just want to recognize that we're going to start losing people. So.
No, that's quite all right. We'll be quick, I think, and certainly around and available to answer questions for those that might want to stay on the call or reach out to us afterwards. I think Elizabeth did a really great job just sort of summarizing some of the key elements for this and just underscoring that the PIT count is a single day in time and is only what you see on that single day in time, right? So it's constrained by geography, constrained by count teams, constrained by individuals who may or may not want to participate in a survey or who are comfortable or uncomfortable taking a survey. And so really urge the folks on this call to take a look at some of the longitudinal results across the system when you're really trying to wrap your hands around what homelessness means. I think the count also underscored, I think during the pandemic and the reduction in our numbers and then this sort of rebounding back to pre-pandemic levels that, the federal investment of additional funds in non-congregate solutions for folks that are experiencing homelessness and the impacts of eviction moratoriums and things of that nature that allowed people to stay stable in their homes is sort of an indicator that homeless systems alone are not the solution, but that this robust intersection of housing solutions, permanent housing solutions, sort of non-traditional responses to what we would traditionally think of as emergency sheltering or sheltering solutions might be the intersection of behavioral health and somatic health. I mean, certainly COVID underscored for us as a community, and I think across the region that previous to the pandemic, right, people were cyclically moving through systems of care, whether it be healthcare systems and hospitalizations, correctional and public safety systems, and homeless systems. So the mobility of someone through those high response systems kept numbers low at any given point for any of those systems. But during the pandemic, when public safety systems were not arresting people and incarcerating them, where they were doing early releases, when hospitals were stepping down in patient psych wards to make room for physical health patients who were dying in their triage responses, you were seeing this sort of large influx of those heavier somatic and behavioral health individuals with really high needs and perhaps long-term criminogenic type histories were pushing disproportionately only into the homeless system. So part of what you're will be seeing, I think, in trending over the next couple of years, regardless of how great systems are at housing folks, and something we should be paying attention to is the critical somatic needs of these individuals and the inappropriateness of a homeless shelter bed or a permanent bed with no wraparound support services really being a place for someone that has severe clinical needs or somatic health needs that really can't be managed inside of a shelter system. I think you also saw a rise, and I think Elizabeth alluded to this, in permanent housing solutions with the influx of emergency housing vouchers and other sort of COVID response systems that allowed us to partner with housing agencies and in Prince George's County alone, house an additional 139 folks that had long-term chronic sort of episodes of homelessness in permanent housing solutions and keep them there. So for me, it seems clear that that the need to continue the work at the intersection of health and housing and homelessness is something that we really need to remain committed to. And it's not a single solution by one system. I think that's sort of an important critical takeaway. And I think Elizabeth alluded to the increase in elderly, and it's not just around the somatic and physical health needs of the elderly and their inability perhaps to age in place, but it's also the fact that as they are going through the aging process, people pass on. And so where you might have had a robust two-person household, for example, that both had Social Security, one unfortunately passes away, and now the remaining individuals relying on a single Social Security, and they can't afford their housing in this market anymore. And so some of what we're seeing, particularly in the elderly and aging populations, is just the physical lack of income sufficient to meet the rental needs or the housing needs in our market. And it's something that I think we really have to pay close attention to. Those numbers are growing exponentially in our homeless systems. We've had to reduce family beds in order to make beds for single elderly adults. So, and I think the trend is only going to continue for a while as people are finding themselves not able to afford the market. And that's not really a reason for someone to be homeless, but unfortunately that is definitely a contributing factor as we see it in our community, and I would imagine in some of the others. And the only other thing I wanted to just point out, because I know we're low on time, is that the length of time that folks are having to stay in our system because we cannot get them into affordable housing is reducing the bed turnover rates, right? So we're able to take in less people over time. We're starting to see the beginnings of turnaways that we weren't seeing when we had robust COVID-funded NCS shelter responses, where we were able to take in everybody. As those expanded services of beds begin to decline again, we're going to start seeing increases in turnaways. And chronic homeless has in part quite a bit to do with length of stay in a state of homelessness. And so folks that are perhaps clinically inappropriate for shelters but have no appropriate bed available, right, maybe staying for longer periods of time and therefore morphing over into chronicity when they wouldn't normally be in our chronic numbers. So I think that that's contributing to some of that growth, and also to the slow turnover of bed utilization. And probably my partner in Baltimore City will have more on that. And then you may have seen just a slight uptick in youth and young adults under the age of 24 being counted. I just want to point out that both Prince George's County and Baltimore City are youth homeless demonstration program sites. And so I think connecting to youth in a much more robust way and offering a lot more services in the sheltering environment and housing environment for that particular subpopulation is allowing us to see some growth in those numbers, which says that we're really finding young people where they are and engaging them in the services they need, where previously they may not have been identified or served, and much more at risk over time. So I'll turn it over.
Yeah, thank you. So we only have a few minutes left. So Ms. Van, sorry if you could do a real quick wrap up.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I don't know if I can top that. We're seeing very similar things here in Arlington. I'm Trina Van. I'm the Homeless Services Coordinator here in Arlington County, and I work for the Department of Human Services, which serves as the lead for the COC. We're much smaller scale here in Arlington, but you know, any large increase, the impacts are felt. Certainly, and we saw similar trends here. We saw increases in all of our counts and subpopulation counts, except for veterans and chronic homelessness. Veterans, we didn't see any change this year. Chronic homelessness numbers went down, and those are two areas of focus for our community that points to some of the best practices that Elizabeth and Renee spoke to, utilizing Housing First, targeting the resources that we receive to those who are most vulnerable in our community. Our numbers have gone back to pre-pandemic levels. We are, as a community, pivoting to the same issues, right? We're not able to keep up with this new inflow. Our eviction rates are increasing. We're seeing housing providers being more risk adverse in housing people that are coming from homelessness. And so that's impacting our ability now to help people exit the homeless response system. So we're definitely feeling a very similar squeeze here in Arlington, and just appreciate the opportunity to, you know, share some of those experiences, and then also happy to stay on a little bit longer if folks have questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Van and Ms. Pope. I think it's, you know, the numbers that Ms. Young presented are one thing, but then having the your experiences to actually really talk to us about what people are experiencing is so important to this work and to all of our understanding of the issue. So I really appreciate you spending that time with us and the work that you're doing in each of your jurisdictions. I know we're at time and we packed a lot into this meeting. You know, if folks do have questions, particularly in the report, you can reach out to Ms. Young if this is something we want to dig into more at a future COG board meeting. We can bring this back again. We had a number of things we wanted to get through this this month, I guess. So I just want to say thank you again, particularly to the last folks who presented today and everyone who joined us. We will be sending out, the staff will be sending out materials that were reviewed today, and we look forward to seeing you, if not before, on June 14th for our meeting. And note that if we can work it out, we may be going on a field trip instead of being in the COG offices. So again, thank you all, and thank you to the staff for a wonderful meeting and all the preparation that went into this. And we'll see you in June.